Welcome to the very first episode of the Ascetus podcast, featuring your two new heterosexual dads, GLO and myself, Full Metal. We thought this podcast was very necessary as we're in the midst of a crisis of masculinity, especially if you look at anything that's been coming out of the manosphere for the past 5 years at the very least. So today, GLO and I are going to look at the Freudian view of masculinity. We're going to go to the old books, and your two new dads are going to give you a fresh perspective.
Since officially you have two heterosexual dads, me, GLO, and my co-host, Full Metal, I want to jump right into it, discuss masculinity, and what better way to discuss masculinity than to start with the phallus.
So the phallus is something that we're all familiar with, I would hope, at least. You know, a lot of people tend to think of it in the literal sense as the penis. But, of course, with Freud and with anything worth knowing, there's more to it than just that.
According to Freud, there are multiple penises. One, there is your penis, and you can never be sure of its performance. Sometimes it is erect, and sometimes it's not. Likewise, your voice can be your penis. Sometimes you give a good presentation, sometimes you don't. If you're a soldier, your gun is your penis, your phallus. Sometimes you shoot on target, and sometimes you don't. The inconsistency of the phallus is what creates masculinity. Men are always insecure about their phallic function, and as a result, engage in a series of compensations, which is what masculinity is. Masculinity is compensating for the inconsistency of your phallus. That's the Freudian definition. Okay, so today we're going to be talking about the symbolic father and the obscene father. A lot of men today grew up without a father, and they don't know how to embody a paternal role. What does it mean to be a father? What does it mean to be a man? Can a woman be a man? Can a woman embody a paternal role, according to Freud? And so Freud is quite pessimistic about the paternal role. He himself had a lot of friction with his own father. And he says, a real father exerts authority only insofar as he positions himself as the embodiment of a transcendent symbolic agency, insofar as he accepts that it is not he himself, but the big other that speaks his words. So according to Freud, if you want to serve as a father, you have to embody the role and forget who you are to the point that you're dead, that you don't exist. You're just a role and nothing else.
So is he basically saying then that in order for you or for an individual to respect their father, they have to be seen more almost than just their biological father? Like that itself is not going to cut it, right? I think what he's saying is that person has to embody some sort of grander authority than just I am your biological father. There has to be some other force at play there. Is that what he's getting at?
That's exactly it. So who is Superman without the cape? Or who is Batman without the mask? Or who is the police officer without his uniform? This person is dead. They don't exist. And all that remains is their role.
Mm-hmm. I mean, a pop culture example, I guess, would be, if we go back to the band Kiss, they did the whole shtick. They didn't do any mask, none of the bullshit, none of that. And nobody cared. And all of a sudden, they put on this suit, this uniform, and it becomes this symbol of authority. And as soon as they made that transition, that's when their career really started to take off. So I think it's a bit of a stretch, but I think our listeners can kind of get the idea. There has to be something additional to you just being a person performing a role or having just a generic status as a father or as a biological father in this case, or as just a generic authoritative figure. There has to be something above and beyond that position in itself.
A father has a certain uniform, and when we look at a bourgeois father, the kind of masculinity we saw in the West in the past 100 years, a father had a uniform. Mm-hmm. And a big part of that uniform was the belt. Mm-hmm. And so he would use his paternal belt. And, the question is, who is the father outside of his role? Mm-hmm. And we get into the issue of symbolic castration, where Freud dealt with a lot of men who had a position of authority. They were military men or police officers.
Mm-hmm.
And they felt that they themselves could never live up to their symbolic paternal role. They felt castrated by that role. And this was a very common phenomenon in his practice.
Mm-hmm.
And so we get into the issue of the phallus, which is a penis. And for Freud, the phallus is a very important topic.
Mm-hmm.
And the phallus is really the centerpiece of masculinity. You know, a lot of people will ask, what is masculinity? And masculinity is the phallus, which is to say, masculinity is a penis that is inconsistent. A man is never consistent in his ability to have sex. He's not consistent in his programming, in his speech giving.
Mm-hmm.
And this creates an insecurity. This creates dick measuring and competition and compensation. And that whole process is what masculinity is to Freud.
Mm-hmm.
In contrast, woman does not have a phallus. She just needs to show up.
Mm-hmm.
And then a little tricky part here is the woman is the phallus, which is to say that men compare each other's sexual ability by how attractive their wives and girlfriends are.
Mm-hmm.
So we can have a dick measuring competition, and we can have a girlfriend beauty competition, which is,
mm-hmm.
once again, a dick measuring competition. So man has a phallus, and the woman is the phallus, which is quite offensive to a lot of women when they're going to hear this.
But I think, that it naturally extends, I think, from the male space. I mean, at the end of the day, right, where I guess the stereotypical man would be a resource gatherer, and that itself would bestow some sort of status on you. And naturally, if you're in a close enough relationship that you could say that is your woman, that is naturally going to extend into that realm. I think that's unavoidable, no matter how people want to spin it. It doesn't matter what ideological system you're in. I think that is at the point of biology at that level. I mean, it's not like people didn't compare wives in communism.
So, I mean, I guess the issue is when you're a resource gatherer, you're never going to be able to gather the same amount of resources consistently.
Mm-hmm.
And so by becoming a resource gatherer, you become measured by your resource gathering ability,
mm-hmm.
and you become insecure about it. And this creates a castrating effect. You're insecure about your ability to perform, either in an economic sense or in the sexual sense.
Definitely. And then you have, the entrance of mass market products to help assuage that lack. And I think that would kind of help us also explain it a little better, because not only can it be a physical object, but for men in particular, I think it could also be their role. I mean, especially if we take the example of a police officer.
Yeah, let's take a step back and discuss the issue of lack. Lack is a very big issue in psychoanalysis, and I think the easiest way to describe it is like this. We have the number 1, where 1 exists in a positive sense. It is. Then we have the number 0, something does not exist. And lack is the number -1.
Mm-hmm.
We want it to exist, but it doesn't.
Mm-hmm.
A man who has 2 shoes has 2 shoes. A man without shoes doesn't have any shoes. But a man with 1 shoe is missing a shoe. And so we see this living dead. We see this imaginary shoe that should be there, but isn't, and haunts us.
Mm-hmm.
Lack is a very serious topic in psychoanalysis because desire and drive is mediated by lack. And this also opens up the issue of fetishism.
Mm-hmm.
If a man lacks, what is he going to do? Well, he's going to create disguises for himself, right? And so if a man lacks ability,
mm-hmm.
he can give you a stern father speech. Maybe your father is afraid he can't improve your grades, so you have an impotent yelling. So yelling or costumes or any kind of flamboyance generally is a fetish used to cover up a lack. When we discuss Freud, and especially in Lacan.
Mm-hmm.
And speaking of lack, if we are to assert our symbolic phallic authority, the price to be paid is we must renounce our position as agent and function as a medium through which the big other speaks. So when Superman puts on his clothing, his super cape, he loses his agency. He's not seen as a normal human being. He's just seen as a symbol. I guess one of the things that you're going to find is men who are insecure are going to indulge in fetishism and cover up their own perceived lack. That's how you see a lot of fake corporate personas nowadays.
So I think that I think when you say in the corporate space, I think that brings up a very good point to sort of jump off of, because not only can that lack manifest itself in purchasing objects or dressing flamboyantly or having some sort of extremely defined identity, it could also manifest itself in the role that a man chooses to do, or in their profession, right? So, I think the easiest example would be a police officer.
Yeah. So, unfortunately, the stereotype for police officers is men who wish to assert authority but could not in their private lives, and then got a job asserting that authority. So they would hide their own personal lack through a role given to them by the state.
Mm-hmm. It's like a state sanctioned phallus, right? I mean, obviously, cops are, depending on where our listeners are, usually the only people who are allowed to have a gun.
Yeah, police officers have a monopoly on violence, and this monopoly creates an insecurity where what happens when they take off their uniform and no longer have this monopoly on violence. Unfortunately, sometimes they try to reassert their monopoly on violence, and the stereotype is that they beat their wives. So, but this wife beating is a sign of impotence, where why are military and police officers accused of beating their wives, or why do they engage in this? Depending on your view, it's because when they remove their uniform, they don't know who they are anymore. And that's a desire to jump back into the uniform, unfortunately, at the woman's expense.
Mm-hmm. So would you say then that I think the essence of what we're trying to get at here is that over-identification with that external force, that external authority bestowing entity, is where the issue comes from. So is there a way to balance that?
I think the issue here, and I'm sure our listeners know a lot of military men, is the longer you wear the mask, the more you become the mask. And after you've been in the military or in the police force for too long, what is too long? Maybe the listener can decide, you become the mask. There's nothing left.
Mm-hmm.
And so the phallus of the state ends up castrating the person. Once the phallus of the state is gone, the person doesn't have his own penis or phallus. Mm. That's the tragedy there.
Mm-hmm.
So if you want to be respected, you can assert the phallus of the state, but in so doing, you will lose your own phallus. A good metaphor for this is, the more coffee you drink, the more tired you will be the next day. The more alcohol you drink, the worse you'll feel the next day. And the more state authority you wield, the more you will be castrated and lose your own phallic function.
Mm-hmm. So I think the example I just thought of would be, let's say you got a hot date, you match with some chick on Tinder or whatever, it's going great, perfect, you're ready to meet up, and you're getting a little anxious about your sexual performance. So you go to one of your boys at the gym or wherever, you get some Viagra, just so you're thinking, I'm gonna just blow her mind, and then let's say you do. But the only reason you did it is because you took that pill. And now you've created a scenario where it's impossible to have that sort of sexual authority on a consistent basis again.
Right. So ironically, the Viagra castrates you. I mean, both in a metaphorical sense, where you're afraid of performing by yourself, but also in a physical sense, in a biological sense. The more Viagra you take, the less your penis will function. So there's always a deal with the devil, whether the devil is drugs or whether the devil is a real devil, or maybe the devil is the state. You pay for everything you receive. Let's contrast the symbolic father with the obscene father. The symbolic father is perfect. The state is supposed to be perfect. The king is supposed to be perfect. But in a quest for perfection, perfection is difficult to achieve. So how do you follow all of the rules perfectly all of the time? If your father tells you to clean your room, how do you accomplish this consistently?
Mm-hmm.
Well, in comes the obscene father, or as what I like to call him, the bad uncle. And the bad uncle figures out a way for you to perform the symbolic mandate to clean your room by throwing everything in the closet and brushing everything under the rug. We saw this in a big way in communist countries, where there was the official economy, but everything that the official economy could not do, provide toilet paper and butter and jeans, was done by the unofficial economy, also known as the obscene father. And so wherever you will see a symbolic father, there is always an obscene father. Whenever you see a perfect father, you'll always see a bad big brother or a bad uncle.
I think it's very easy to see with anybody who's spoken to anyone who grew up in a formerly communist country. I mean, I think GLO hit the nail on the head. They'll always mention that, yeah, there were the rules, but then, if you wanted a pair of Levi's, or you wanted some records, or you wanted anything that was kind of considered outside of the system, there was still a way to get it. And it was kind of this wink, wink, nudge, nudge. You got to talk to this guy, and it's all kind of outside of the perfection of communism. But I think it's just easier to see with communism, especially in the United States. You kind of look at how the more upper echelon people operate, and it's once you start diving into it, you could clearly see they're not operating under the same rules. So it's not as if this is exclusive to communism. I think all of our listeners can see and do their own research into it, but there's a whole lot of rules for thee, but not for me.
I think to double back to your Viagra example and to discuss our current permissive culture of 2020, the symbolic father is the pornographic film, which is going to show you, unfortunately, the modern man, how they need to perform sexually. That is going to be the paternal model. And the obscene father is going to be the Viagra drug dealer. So there's the superego ideal of how you need to be as a man. Jacked porn star with tremendous penis. But since that's not easily attainable, the obscene father is going to give you a cheat code. That's what the obscene father does. He gives you a cheat code. And in this case, this cheat code is going to be Viagra. We do not have the public repressive rule of law and order undermined by covert forms of rebellion, mocking a civilized gentle appearance, but the opposite. Public authority maintains its power by obscene shabby realm. And so the subversive twist in all of this wonderful conversation that me and Full Metal are having today, is that the symbolic father cannot maintain his authority without the obscene father. There needs to be cheating. There needs to be a trick, a way for everyone to participate and save face.
And I mean, I think, everybody listening has gone through an experience where they have seen that, or they have gone through it. I mean, if you haven't cheated in school at some point, I mean, I don't know what to tell you there. You definitely have, and you know it. It's basically what I'm trying to get at.
I think the school is an overbearing superego injunction that's not achievable. We can never be those students. And so that unreasonable expectation invites the obscene father. You have the symbolic father, which is said the university, and then you have the obscene father immediately stepping in as unemployedprofessors.com.
Going on the example of the university, I think again is another very clear example that most of our listeners should be familiar with is you have the symbolic father authority figure of the university itself, and then you have that lovely guy in your dorm who has an Adderall prescription, who likes to make a little bit of money on the side, and he gets to help everybody out. Technically you're being performance enhanced by those drugs, but you live up to the standard of the symbolic authority by getting that essay in on time and meeting the word count and all that other BS.
Right. So the big point is that the symbolic father and the obscene father, they're a pair. Whenever you see one, you should look for the other. When you look at the bodybuilder and you look at his body and his diet and his nutrition, there is a shadowy drug dealer, the obscene father, that makes that possible. Also, in the academic sense, you have someone who has very good grades, and he is helped by his obscene father, the Adderall drug dealer.
Mm-hmm.
The reason why we're stressing this point is people have guilt about having an obscene father, whatever form he takes. But Freud is going to say that there's always an obscene father.
Mm-hmm.
You can't make it without an obscene father.
Yeah.
And so the perfect subject is one who has ironic distance, is one who has this obscene father, knows how to skirt the rules. So Full Metal and I discussed masculinity, both in the positive sense and the negative sense, the symbolic father and the obscene father. What happens when you fail in the paternal mandate? What happens when the mask slips and the mask isn't convincing enough? The prototypical situation here that Freud referenced himself is pre-revolutionary France, known as the Ancien Regime. The rulers were approached with amassing too much authority, as if we are dealing with a brutal excess of power. The opposition acts as a hysteric, since it is reproach of excess exercise of power covers the exact opposite. And here it is. Here's the truth. The true reproach of the opposition is that the regime is not strong enough and does not live up to its mandate of power. So if you are not a convincing enough father, if you don't embody this paternal mandate convincingly enough, you will be reproached as being a brutal tyrant. The issue is not that you're a brutal tyrant, is that you can't sell it. So hysteria is an endless questioning. When your legitimacy is in question, let's say you're married or have a girlfriend and your leadership as a symbolic father is not strong enough, you're going to be met with hysteria. And hysteria is a symptom that your symbolic paternal authority is not convincing enough.
And going off of that hysteria, I think it's pretty safe to say that everyone has had a moment. I mean, at least I remember it fairly clearly for myself. The moment where you realize that the ideal you have of your parents is the epitome of caregiver and paternal love. And, you'll reach a point where you realize that, wait a minute, they're not perfect. They're just people, and then you have that sort of hysteric chaos within yourself. And I think an important part of being a man and being a person in any sense is being able to come through that hysteria that situation has caused and coming through with it in a positive light and seeing that, hey, you know what? That's just how the situation is. What am I going to do with it at this point? Well, that might mean you have to start taking care of yourself a little bit more or what have you, or realize that symbolic authority did not have that power. It was not strong enough. It caused some sort of chaos, and now you have to deal with it and figure out how you're going to move forward. At the end of the day, that hysteria is a symptom that paternal power has not been recognized, that it's not strong enough and it's not living up to its mandate of power.
Hysteria is a very big part of Freudian psychoanalysis. A lot of Freud's patients were hysteric women. their husbands and fathers did not know what to do with them.
Mm-hmm.
And they would be met with an endless hysteric questioning. And they asked Freud to fix it. Unfortunately, there's nothing Freud could do to fix it. The symbolic paternal authority needed to act in a way that would look more legitimate.
Mm-hmm.
I think hysteria is seen as a feminine thing, but both genders can exhibit it. And as society changes rapidly and we look for new authority figures, there is going to be a lot of hysteria in that transition, regardless of what kind of authority you embody. Or maybe you're the hysteric. Who knows?
As the legitimacy of society's paternal structures is put in question, a hysteric response is inevitable, and we could all easily find examples of that, whether it's online or whether it's on any other standard form of media. You could all see it. Thank you for listening to us here at the Ascetus Podcast. The link to the Ascetus Telegram channel is below for those who want a steady stream of the material that inspires us to make these podcasts for you. If you'd like to go deeper on the topics discussed, you could click the link in the description below, and a member of the Ascetus team will get in touch with you about personalized, in-depth guidance about philosophy and fitness. We do our best to bring you the freshest content possible, and all we ask is that you like this video and share it with someone who would appreciate it. Until next time, Full Metal out.